Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Fortified Life podcast, where we are passionate about developing a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. I'm your host, Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify. Every week, we have the opportunity to bring on authors, speakers, coaches, leaders, and nonprofits who are also passionate about putting God back in business. And it's no different this week. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited about our guest. But let me tell you a little bit more about her before I we get into the interview. Heather Trumpfheller serves as Chief Growth Officer at Switchboard, a nonprofit tech startup mobilizing Christians around the world. She lives in Austin, Texas, and is heavily involved in the faith and work space, sitting on boards such as Austin Women in Technology and Austin Bridge Builders Alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fortified Life podcast, Heather Trumpfheller. Heather, what's going on?
Hello, thanks for having me, Jason. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. Well, Heather, you look at your bio, anybody that I know that's like a founder, anybody that's built anything or been asked to start something, we know there's a story. So we know
Yeah.
you just didn't wake up in 2026 and
hmm
boom, here we go. So take us on your professional journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always felt like I was put on this earth to be a connector, right?
Mm.
To tell people's stories. Since I was like 5 years old, I would walk around with my hairbrush and I would interview people and share too much. And my mom would be like, no, you weren't supposed to tell them that. Or I would ask all these questions. But I always really did have this superpower of meeting people, building rapport quickly, building that trust, asking those open-ended questions, and then advocating on their behalf. And so for me, it was a really natural flow to major in journalism. So I grew
Mm.
up in Dallas. I was very involved with the news program and I interned even as a high schooler at a news station. And then I went to University of Missouri. I studied broadcast journalism there. I ended up actually working at the NBC affiliate in Missouri as a reporter for 4 years. But I really struggled because my best story was someone's worst day, right? And so here
Right.
I am, a young 20-year-old struggling to compartmentalize. And I was not walking with Jesus at this time, actually. And so I grew up in the church, but I didn't really follow Jesus, I would say, right? I was definitely like a legalism aspect of it, or we do this to be a good family. And then I didn't step in foot into a church from 18 to my 30s. And so I'm in the marketplace, right? I'm in a very dark but beautiful aspect where I got to meet people and tell their stories. But I ultimately wanted to leave Missouri and then I career pivoted to a public relations firm. And that wasn't too hard of a pivot because ultimately I was just now advocating for the people I used to report the stories on. Right now I'm pitching their
Mm.
stories. And then I actually had this really beautiful divine encounter with someone who I met through networking, and they essentially were, "Oh, you are also in sales." And I'm like, "No, I'm a journalist." And they were like, "No, but what you do as a journalist is essentially similar to sales, right? You meet people, you advocate on their behalf, and you're brokering those connections." And it was the first time that someone had really looked at me and showed me that these themes were transferable, but I was so rigid of like, "Oh, I'm a journalist." And so I actually career pivoted again into tech. And then I worked my way up at a tech consulting company in recruiting, in sales, tech leadership. And really, that's where I started really seeing that these skills were transferable, but that tech and the digital platform has these connection aspects that people really weren't seeing yet, right? And then obviously the pandemic really showcased that for us. But to tie in my faith-based life, right? So I'm really predominant in the tech world. I'm running Austin Women in Technology, which is a tech networking space here in Austin. Um, and then really 2020 hits. I'm burnt out. I'm overloaded with tech data, right? Working from home, lack of boundaries. And my friend sends me a podcast, and it's all about anxiety as a weapon to bring you back to Jesus. And
Mm.
she goes, "I know you have not talked to God in a long time, but you're listening to these self-help podcasts. Why don't you treat this like a TED Talk? Treat this like a podcast." And so I'm going on a walk with my dog right in the middle of the workday, trying to take a break from the screen time, and I put on the podcast. And I go home and I remember I'm like, Jesus, if you are real, speak to me. And
Mm,
he does, right? Like I
wow.
created this stillness to allow the Holy Spirit to actually start speaking to me. I started going back and listening to some of those sermons. I ended up getting plugged into a local church, right? Joined a small group, and then it's been this really beautiful season of just integrating God into every area of my life. And so I love your podcast tagline, right, of developing a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace, because that really sounds like my last 5 years. So I'm
Mm,
in the tech world already, but now I'm a new Christian. So now I'm trying to actually bring in boundaries and bring in this transformation that I'm feeling on the inside professionally. And honestly, it was quite hard, right? I'm an Enneagram 3, I'm an achiever. I'm, on the working genius, I'm the galvanizing and I'm the tenacity. And so I'm like, okay, how can I bring this in? But ultimately, I started feeling all this angst at work. And I kept thinking, like, my sort of legalism go to was like, well, I just need to talk about God at work. So then I started an employee resource group, right? And I'm so grateful for all of these faith and work marketplace tools. So I had, abilities to have mentors to be like, here's how you start a faith-based group at your tech company, etc. But I was still having this angst, even though I'm a public Christian, I'm leading Bible studies at work. And so one day I wrote in my prayer journal, God, I've been here at this company for over 10 years. I make good money, I tithe, I talk about you, but make it obvious if I'm supposed to leave. And
mm.
again, be careful what you pray for. I get on my one-on-one with the director, same gentleman who hired me 10 years ago when I was a journalist, right? I've worked for this man this whole time. I said to get on this one-on-one call with him, and he's like, Heather, I think we need to look at a different opportunity for you for work. And I was like, you mean internally? I know, but I mean I quit. And so I literally did. I quit on the spot, not prepping for it from like a savings or a severance
Mhm.
capacity or anything like that. And I just really was like, the creator of the universe just told me that he was going to make it obvious. So I have to believe him, right? And so it's just been this beautiful season of really untying my worthiness from achievements
Ooh,
and
that's good.
looking at God differently and allowing boundaries to come into that, right? God modeled boundaries and Jesus modeled boundaries so well in the Bible, but also just to redefine what work looked like for me. And so I took a really intentional 6 month season to be still and unhurry my life and to actually be desperate for a savior, for provision, for worthiness. I had to really rid myself of some habits and some numbing that was happening. And really, it's just been this beautiful season again of just integrating God into every area of my life. And through that pivot, God was able to then say, here's this next chapter. And so I met the founder of Switchboard through networking here in Austin because I think networking is key, right? Like
Mhm.
building the kingdom is such a communal thing, and we were made in the image of God as relational beings. And so I met the founder of Switchboard and I told him, I said, I come from a tech background, I come from a journalism and storytelling and activator community background. What if we went hand in hand really on this tech platform? And I think that's what's been so good. And we can talk about this later on this episode, but Switchboard ultimately comes from the tech background with the missional lens. And I think so much of when people think of like Christian tech, they think of it as like, oh, maybe the church or the missionary reactively built that, which is great. But I
Mhm.
think when you come from a tech first lens, that's actually really what the digital marketplace and digital discipleship has really been able to steamroll from. So, anyways, that's a little bit of me and my story and how I got to where I am. So,
Man, Heather, you got me ready to run around the room. There's so many places. There's so many places to take this convo. There's a couple of things. One,
okay.
Heather, I don't know if it was a mentor or somebody pointed out because I think a lot of people struggle or sometimes have a blind spot to, well, I've kind of done a lot of different things in the workplace, and I don't know how they all come together. So when you talked about you had somebody actually point out to you, like,
Yeah,
hey,
right.
journalism, PR, that you really sales, you're like, wait a minute, I've always
Yeah,
thought of myself, and they're like, whoa, hold on, time out. No, there's
yeah.
something here. So just talk about the impact that that made, because if we're not careful, people, that just goes right over people's head. And there's, I can't, you know this because you've lived it.
Yeah.
People having that voice, that encouragement, that like, no, there's something here. So
Yeah.
what did that do for you? And what's your wisdom to people that
Yeah.
are unsure how all their experience or skills come together?
Yeah, that's so beautiful. First off, your skills are spiritual. I think that's the biggest thing, right? When I became a Christian, I'm sitting there at church and I hear the Great Commission or I hear this and I'm like, okay, God loves the missionaries the most and the church leaders. And like, I'm down here when I tithe and pray and maybe don't cuss too much, right? And so it's really, I was not looking at my gifts as spiritual, which is
Mm,
first off, like not true. Like that is doing a disservice of how God made me in his image, right? And so I think acknowledging that is one. And then I think two, looking at it that you are in partnership with God. It's not
mm,
chores for dad. And so I also think there's that level of ownership of like, no, I have my strengths that are so unique. So I think
mm,
that's one thing. But two, on the transferable lens, so many people are afraid to give themselves permission to change their mind, right? Like in
mm.
some ways, God says remain, right? Like abide in me, be on the vine. Like I'm a millennial and we get a lot of heat for like quitting too soon when the going gets tough. And I think that is so fair in some ways. Like we definitely do. And God says to remain. But God also gave us free will and this fluidity to change your minds. And so I think for me, I was so stuck on like, no, I said I was going to be a journalist, so I have to be a journalist or I look like a failure, right? And like
Mm.
other people's praise and impressing others was my motivator, and that is just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And so really when I quit the job at the tech market, right? It was hard. And I'll be honest. So, like, get real vulnerable here, right? So, I'm 36. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I quit my job. And I remember people being like, what are you going to talk about? Like, what are we going to write about you in the Christmas card? What
Yeah.
platform do you now have? I was so afraid to lose my worthiness because I was irrelevant.
Mm.
And I was like really like I had like debilitating anxiety around that. Like, what is someone
Wow.
going to ask me about, right? The first questions people ask you when you meet someone stranger is like, what do you do? And oh, are you married? Or tell me about like, do you have kids? And I
Hmm.
was like, no, no, no. Oh, but God is basically putting this dependency on like, I am a child of God. So it
Yeah.
was like also a little bit of that I know people who do not give themselves permission to change their mind. It's because they're getting so like rigid within that, right? They're not letting God really transform them. And so, if there are any like job seekers on this call, some advice I would also have for you is when I quit, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I needed to look at work differently. So, I actually sat down and I made this like career matrix for myself. And
Mm.
I actually wrote out what were my must haves, what were my nice to haves, and what were my red flags, right? One of the things, right, like I mentioned, I was honestly numbing a lot at my job. I quit drinking alcohol and I was like, if I'm going to go back into a sales environment, it cannot be happy hours all the time. Like I
Yeah.
need to drink less. And so that was on my like red flags. Or a nice to have would have been an industry. Or I look at maybe a leadership of a company and there's no women on leadership and I'm
Hmm.
really passionate about that. That's a must have at a company for me or things
Gotcha.
like that. So I put together this matrix and I looked at like what do I proactively want in my next role? And then I put together this reactive transferable themes, right? Like looking at all my jobs, what are some transferable themes that I see there? And then I wrote a resume or I really wrote this like career narrative that was tying in these like this is innately who Heather is. I didn't want my resume to read like a job description, right? I wanted it to be like,
Hmm.
here's who this person was. And I think when I started networking and connecting with people again while looking for a job, I was able to be like, here's what I want to build, right? Here's who I
Yeah.
am. Here's who God make me. Here's how I've already done that. But my skills are spiritual in that. And I think again,
Mm.
like playing that ownership in the Great Commission in your own life, like it doesn't matter what job or what company or what industry you're in because God made you so uniquely you.
Wow. Heather, I love what you just said. You gave some really practical application to you made a career matrix, and I wrote this down. So you
Yeah.
said must haves, nice to haves, and red flags. I mean,
Yeah.
that is gold
Yeah.
right there. Even before you said that, I was just thinking in my mind, like, wow, what Heather just said, it's almost like a career audit or a
Yes.
reassessing of
Totally.
your career. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I actually asked myself was, how do you want to feel at work? And I
Mm,
think so many of us, and again, maybe this is just millennials, like we want to feel certain things, right? Like I want to
mhm,
feel important or necessary or needed or empowered or whatever it might be. And so it was like a little bit of like, how do I want to feel at work? So the Matrix helped me put words to that, but also really like God was just giving me so much comfort that abundance follows alignment.
mm,
And control versus surrender. And even like, I went on this redefining success and measuring your success in like faithfulness, right? Like,
mm.
I want to measure success by faithfulness. And I feel
Yeah.
like that was what I was getting in this season was less pressure on what job I was doing next, but more of this abundance follows alignment, right? And so I think I often was idolizing productivity and
Hmm.
moving too fast to even hear God. And efficiency can just never replace
Yeah.
obedience. And so I think,
Yeah.
again, I created that space to let God move. And then as a result, like, I really would say I've integrated him into every area of my life. And that's really where you live alive and free.
Yes, I love it. It's the integration, the blending. It's like coffee, right? Heather, once you put in the cream and the sugar and you stir it up, that's your
Yeah.
next iteration of the coffee. You can't undo
Yeah.
what's been blended. And so
Yeah.
that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
You said something else that was key, Heather, and that was around untying worthiness from achievement. I know you were starting to talk around the impact of that, but can we just pause for a second because how many men and women
Yeah.
struggle with that in the workplace, and I feel like that's not something that like, oh yeah, overnight, yeah, man, I wasn't worried about, winning or success. It's like, well, hey, this is the marketplace. People
Yeah.
care about metrics and success criteria.
Totally.
So just in the kind of detaching, unraveling of that, what
Yeah.
was the process like? Like you're able to look back and say, wow,
Yeah.
man, I was really so concerned and worried about that. What kind of had to happen mentally and emotionally and spiritually to even recognize that?
Yeah. No, it's wild. I have some childhood friends that have known me obviously my whole life that
Hmm.
sometimes even say they're like, I can barely even recognize you in some ways, but then in some ways it's like you've finally stepped into like the woman you were supposed to be. Like I think it's this
It's
blend
good.
of that. Like some things can't go, like, and some things have to stay, this whole remain and abide. And so I think for me, one, you have to actually create that space and that
Mm,
environment to do so, right? Like you are right. This will never happen overnight. And so when someone actually acknowledges or the like compliment I get of like, wow, I love that boundary or like thank you for saying no to that. I'm always like, oh my gosh, 5 years ago they would have never been like, oh Heather, the one with boundaries. Oh, the one who Heather, the one who said no to this. Like I was such a notorious like I'll show up half to everything to be able to do it all because I don't want to disappoint people. And then when I
mm,
started realizing, like, again, like, not rocket science, but like every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And as a result, like, I was the one being told no. Like, I was saying no to rest. And I read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which
hmm.
John Mark Comer, right? I'm actually reading it again for the third time, I would say, and now I'm reading it not because I'm not getting anxious when I'm reading it. I'm actually like, wow, look at the fruit from this. Like I started actually
Mm.
practicing a Sabbath,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Like
good.
unessential screen times. Like I actually deactivated my Instagram, which is like unheard of in 2026, right? But I was like, there is so much noise and comparison. And half the time, I don't feel like I'm productive or achieving enough simply because I see someone else doing something that's different than me. Not even that that was something I wanted to go do or something I wanted to have. Or even like, right, like we're sitting in front of my travel wall. I feel like there was things that I was like, I was adding places to visit and passport stamps simply to be relevant. And it
Wow.
was just super unhealthy. And so I had to cut out, right? So a little bit of like environment aspect. I also think I really had to like bring that junk drawer to God and be like, help me restore this, right?
Mm.
And then as I started redefining this measurement of success, right, there is this systemic level of it though, right? Like you're gonna get slacks after hours and you're gonna get emails. And for me, I was always like, I must lay my head to the pillow with zero emails in my inbox. Like that's how I would say I defined a good day. And so
Wow.
people used to actually say things to me like, I want you to experience this, not just like cross it off your to-do list. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I resonate to that, like it is such a journey. And for me, I had to delete my numbing devices, right? Like I actually prayed, like God like ruined my vices. And it was Instagram, it was alcohol, it was like, oh, okay, I can go super hard, I can be super productive, and then I can have a glass of wine and immediately turn it off. And so I was then
Mm.
like using alcohol or using scrolling as these shutoffs because I was actually just running at an unsustainable pace that God never asked us to do, right? And so when I
Wow.
read the ruthless elimination of hurry, and I'm reminded like the Holy Spirit is never rushed, and like love is never rushed, right? Like
Yeah.
love takes time. And so these things are supposed to take time, but in this world where everything's instant, right? Like I literally canceled my Amazon subscription because I actually
Mm.
said like if I have to wait 3 days for something, that should be fine. Like it was just this whole like I had to actually put myself in uncomfortable situations or in situations of boredom or non-immediacy to actually like retrain, honestly, like do a dopamine detox, basically. So, anywho, I know a lot of people out there are really focused on this, right? Like, this has like really been really prevalent in 2026 that we know
Yeah.
we're over screen, like so well comparison and connected and production. And it's really just, you might have to start with you. But I
Yeah.
also got really vocal with my small group about this, or I really got vocal with my team at work about this. And it was
Mm.
like, we need to be able to operate at a sustainable pace.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, Heather, I appreciate your transparency and vulnerability. That's number one. And then because God is using that, and then people can see, like, if you're those who are listening, all of us have, if you hadn't been there yet, you
Yeah.
probably will be, and you may be in the middle of it because there's
Yeah.
just, you said there's so much content and there's so much
Yeah.
comparison and what is everybody else doing, and it's hard
Yeah.
to get away from that, but like you said, just taking a
Yeah.
step back and
Yeah.
having that solitude and silence and sabbatical,
Yeah.
Sabbath, all of
Yeah.
that. So
And
that's
those
huge.
are my least favorite spiritual disciplines, right? Like I'm
Of
communal.
course.
I'm like, sure, I love the serving and the giving and the hospitality and the communal prayer
Hmm.
times, but it's the like silence and solitude that's hard for me. And so when I started getting more confidence in that space, I actually used to tell myself, like, walk in the room like God sent you. And so that
Mm.
every room I was going into, it was like purposeful. But when you're operating so fast, you can't walk in with purpose all the time because you
Yeah.
haven't even asked God if He sent you into this room, right? And so it was
Hmm.
really like getting to that place, and ultimately that's what I really love about Switchboard, right? Is so we've built
Hmm.
this tech platform that connects believers with missionaries, right? So just to visualize this, so say you're at part of a church and your pastor talks about, the missionaries sent from your organization or the outreach partners you have or where maybe some of your tithing has gone to. That's a beautiful thing to hear those stories. But imagine if you could have direct impact on those people. Imagine if
Mm.
one of your missionaries is a nonprofit orphanage in Bangladesh and
Hmm.
they're loving on women and children who have been trafficked, but maybe they need help with their fundraising campaign. And so they're rewriting some of their messaging emails. And you're in the
Mm.
marketplace and you're in PR or messaging, and you could help this missionary rewrite their messaging emails for 1 hour so that they're more compelling. That missionary is able to do what God called them to do, which is love on the people in Bangladesh,
Hmm.
actually get an effective email out, and you in the marketplace were able to use your skills to grow the kingdom in a beautiful way. And so we've actually
Mm.
seen this as people finding more purpose in their skill sets, learning that their skills are spiritual, actually taking ownership and playing their part in the Great Commission, but also retaining themselves and learning, like, oh, this is why God gave me a great eye for art, right? Or if you're
Hmm.
a homeschooling parent and you've already written this curriculum, sharing that with a missionary who's preparing to go, abroad, and they're starting a business as missions and they're stressed about their homeschooling curriculum, right? It's like sharing of the resources, or you're hearing about this missionary you've been praying or you've been tithing toward, but imagine if you could like send them an encouraging prayer once a week. And it's really a
Mm.
two-way connection path
Yeah.
that so many people have through their church or through maybe like a donation or like subscribing to a newsletter. But
Hmm.
imagine if you could actually like talk to that indigenous pastor or that missionary in the unreached people group or that outreach partner from your church that you just did the diaper drive, but maybe they need help with fixing their website. And I think that's what so many people don't realize is volunteerism is actually needed for these nonprofits and these missionaries, and it's
Hmm.
crucial to them, but it's crucial for you as the believer in the marketplace who is
Yeah.
so it's so likely you're going to end up burnt out and questioning why you have these skills or why, God sent some people to the mission field and you to the marketplace, because that's what he's wanting to change. He wants you to look at the marketplace, right, as that mission field and not look at it as this hierarchy. That was always my biggest struggle is I'm like, no, God loves the missionaries the most. And in this hierarchy, I'm down here. And God doesn't want that, right? He wants all of
Mm.
us to unite generations and geographies and skill sets and come together really to make heaven more crowded.
Wow. Heather, my brain, as someone who's also worked in tech, my brain's going a few different places. So we've got churches and nonprofits because I'm hearing like an
Yeah.
element of, I heard some CRM, I heard
Hmm.
some almost like Fiverr where there's a
Yep.
database of people
Absolutely.
that like, hey, I need web design and I'm a nonprofit or faith-based
Yep.
organization, and to have a group of vetted, trusted
Yes.
partners, a pool of people that you can reach out to. So is that am I picking up the right
Yep.
sort of?
So
Okay.
we're entirely free, really. We are donor funded, grant funded, right? And we're working on potentially even some like church missions funds go. So
Mm.
we're going to manage like volunteers and their missions management through us. But we really are. We're entirely free. And we're building strong partnerships, right, with these
Okay.
churches, these sending and equipping organizations. So would love to talk to even the listeners here. Like we'd love to get you on the platform, right? We've got a skill assessment that will actually show you volunteer roles where people need your skill set or prayer
Mm.
opportunities that align with regions or causes that you're passionate about, right? Where you're using the AI matching. And also, right, like the pandemic showed us how much can be done virtually to share the
Yeah.
load. We're looking at it from a professional lens, right? Like you and I are on Zoom. We may never meet each other in person. And why is that different for the Great Commission, right? So
Hmm.
much could be done online. And I also think so this is a hot take as someone who says they're in missions. I've never been on a missions trip, but I'm reimagining what it looks like to go on a missions trip. I am
Mm.
talking and empowering and equipping missionaries every day, but I may never get a passport stamp that's on a missions trip, right? But if you
Okay.
bring that into your marketplace, right, and building this community around that to truly unite those generations, then you can also see the miracles that God is doing. We often read the book of Acts and we think like, oh, God's not healing and prophesying the way that they used to. Well, actually, he is, but we might not be practicing it as much in the United
Hmm.
States church, right? And so when you can talk to a pastor or a missionary in a different part of the world, you can actually see some of the miracles that God is doing.
Hmm.
And it's a very uniting thing, which is so amazing in this day and age when we've never been like more ununited, right? And so
Yeah.
it's really hard in that space. But yeah, we're really entirely free. So for like volunteers or believers, they come in, they can take a skill assessment, they can tell us how they want to serve. They
Hmm.
can also tell us how they want to be involved. Is it pray? Is it to encourage someone, right? Do you want, are like me on Strengths Finders, the woo is my number one strength. You're telling me I could send a motivational message to a different missionary every day? That is so much better than scrolling on my Instagram. The dopamine you would get from that is just so much better, right? And then for the missionaries, we know that you are often the Jills and Jacks of all trades, right? The missionaries have to move to a country and learn the language and homeschool their family and also like develop a business that will keep them there and then disciple and evangelize, but maybe they don't want to get bogged down with a tax question, right? Or they
Mm.
are parenting a child with special needs and they're really wanting someone to walk through that season with them. And it's like those are beautiful life ways that someone could show up. Or if a missionary is preparing to go, or a church plant is starting bilingual services. Imagine if that pastor could practice Spanish with someone on the platform, right? It's like then
Wow.
you get to use your language skills to actually further the kingdom. And it's just this really uniting way about it. But yeah, it's also a way for churches and missionaries to tell the story of what their church is doing as well, right? Like
Hmm.
volunteers days are beautiful, but imagine if a pastor could look at a report that's like 75 people in my congregation are praying for these missionaries. And then that might change the focus of what they talk about from the pulpit. And then maybe now more people in the congregation are involved in missions. So anyways, obviously very passionate about this topic, but I think just reimagining what missions looks like. It doesn't need a passport and it doesn't need a seminary degree, right? He just really needs your obedience.
That is so good, Heather. What have you found, Heather? Because I'm sure you get all types of people are like you said, you have the assessment. Hey, here are
Mhm.
my skills. What is maybe the top 3 to 5 things you're seeing
Yeah.
requested from whether it's domestic, overseas, from a church, from a nonprofit? What's kind of a recurring, hey, we need this?
Yeah. So we've got about a couple thousand, I would say, people on the platform right now. We're really only like 3 years old of having like an
Gotcha.
actual tech product out there in the world. And I would say predominantly missionaries really need a sounding board, right? They're
Mm,
often the visionary invention and wonder, and they've got an idea and they need a sounding board to help them put it into place, right? Think like an entrepreneur, right?
mm-hmm.
They do the same thing. So it's really they need a sounding board. A lot of it also is like marketing type skill sets or
Mm,
social media type campaigns. Some of it is simply even just like proofread my website or this
mm,
newsletter before it goes out. And then there's also some like technical tech components for sure of maybe like helping me fix my website or I'm setting up Google Ads. Can you help me set up that? So there's some tech components there, but we also see a lot of people truly wanting someone to walk through with them like a season of prayer, right? Like, okay,
mm.
I just
It's
got
good.
my dad got diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I want to pray with someone who is maybe also navigated losing a loved one to Parkinson's. And imagine if you could come together in prayer so specifically,
Yeah.
it's just really beautiful. So I would say to boil it down in all capacities, it's really a sounding board. It's in
Mm,
prayer, it's encouragement, it's to help them flesh out these really big ideas or really get organized when often missionaries and church plants and nonprofit leaders are the experts of a lot of things and they're wearing a
mhm.
lot of hats. They're often over, under-resourced, underfunded, and having to overproduce to get those resources and that funding. And so it's really to help share that load.
Wow, my goodness. Heather, as the Chief Growth Officer, what are you strategically focused on? This is awesome platform. You said
Yeah.
there's a front-facing component coming.
Yep.
So what are you focused on in your role?
Yeah, and I'll put this in the show notes. So globalswitchboard.io is our website. And really, we right now just a desktop browsing app. And like I
Gotcha.
mentioned, it's entirely free. There's a skill assessment on there. If you're a ministry or a church plant, we also have a gap analysis on there. We've got a
Mm.
catalog so you can actually scroll through, right? Like maybe you're a missionary and you think you need help with funding, which maybe you do, but maybe it's your messaging and your brand needs to be rewritten so that when you go on your fundraising campaign, you actually go with a little bit more
Hmm.
conviction or better messaging. Or I think often, again, back to the sounding board, people don't really know what they're looking for. So we've got a catalog on there. We want to help the nonprofits and the missionary diagnose that. But we really do also want to help these Christians realize that their skills are spiritual, that their time is valuable, that they can play their part in the Great Commission. So all of that's on our website there, the skill assessment, the assessment for the ministries, create a profile on how to get involved. It takes about 30 seconds. One of the things that is mandatory when making a profile is we want to know where you go to church because we
Mm.
actually do want to connect with your missions pastor so that we
Yeah.
can tell that pastor, hey, you have 60 people from your congregation serving. Here's the skill sets they have. And then these churches are actually able to learn more about their congregations and then also tell those stories. And
Yeah.
so a lot of churches actually reach out to me and they say, hey, what stories happened in January so I can put it in our missions newsletter. And we'll tell them, like, here's three really powerful connections or people that met over prayer or ministries that were empowered because of your congregation. And then that's
Mm.
contagious. So, right, really like seeing the fruit of what God is doing in this digital age is really beautiful way to get excited and contagious about that. So, I would say just reminding yourself that everybody can do something,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's using your skills, whether it's you have a gift of prayer, whether it's being that sounding board for a ministry or that woo girl positivity for someone. I think everybody can do something. And that's really when it becomes beautiful.
I love it. I love the woo girl.
Yes.
That's a new phrase. I'm gonna have to use that one. I'm the woo person.
But I'll make sure all of this is in the show notes here for that. But I would just love to connect with you, right? And if you are wanting to serve, or if you have a missions pastor or a church where you think my church would really love this, right? We've had people have serve days or missions days, and we've been able to make, tailored one pages and QR codes that connect your whole church together. So again, we lead with tech. But then I've got missions teams and I've got seminary degrees that helping me make this sure it's theological or you know what I mean, Bible
Hmm.
based. But I
Hmm.
come from a tech background and I really want to make sure that people can be connected, but ultimately be connected for the kingdom.
My goodness. Heather, I don't want you to get in trouble, but what is there anything you can share that's on the horizon
Yeah.
in 2026 or maybe even going into 2027?
Yeah, definitely scaling. We're talking about building a native app, right? So many people say things like, oh, if I would get push notifications. So some
Hmm.
of the biggest thing that I think I've struggled with, right? So my role as chief growth is I'm building these partnerships, right? Building these relationships with the sending organizations, the churches, the missions conferences, even the marketplace, right? I've spoken to the Metas and the Sale Points and Salesforce and Cloudflares and
Wow.
Amazon employee resource groups about how they can get involved. But really, what I'm hearing from a lot of people is we know that this is important, but how does this become urgent? And again, going
Mm.
back to even in my own life, how can I scale things back and create enough margin to reprioritize some of these things? And so I would say we're combating this like, how does this become urgent?
Okay.
By creating smaller steps. For the longest time, we were really a virtual volunteering. You come in and you serve. Okay, now I'm on a project with a missionary, or I'm a consultant for an hour to this church plant. But now what we're doing is creating smaller bite-sized steps for people to actually get engaged. Okay, maybe it's me sending an encouragement chat to that missionary. And then if I send them an encouragement chat every week, I'm probably going to want to know more about them. So then I'm going to want to start praying for them. And then when I start praying for them, maybe I want to actually start advising them on marketing as my strength. And now I'm actually working on a project with them. And then maybe now I actually get my giving dollars. And so we're watching
Mm.
people transformed through these kingdom relationships. So I would say that's what to expect from Switchboard is smaller and more entry points to get into these kingdom relationships because I'm not measuring how often you talk as success, right? Again, success to me is now faithfulness, but I want more people to have these abilities to be faithfulness and to have these obedience moments that are maybe a little bit smaller and bite-sized.
My goodness. Heather, I could talk to you another 3 hours, but folks, we got to let her
Yes.
get back to making an impact. Before you go, Heather, and you mentioned the website earlier, but the
Yeah.
best way for people to get in touch with you,
Yeah.
find out what the organization is doing, where can they go?
Yeah, add me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with you. I'll make sure that that's linked in there as well. But globalswitchboard.io, right? We're putting out monthly newsletters that are talking about what God is doing. We're integrating the faith in the workplace. We also want to be this easy place for you to come when you're like, I need to demystify missions, right? Like, I also want to
That's
be
good.
that for you. So hit me up on LinkedIn, hit me up on globalswitchboard.io. And really, I'm so excited for you to take ownership of the Great Commission because, man, it's so good when you feel like you're actually a part of it. Yes.
I love it, Heather. I'm so excited
Thank
that
you.
we had this conversation. And folks, you need to definitely, we'll have all of Heather's information in the show notes, but you need to know what's going on with Switchboard. So I strongly encourage you to lean in. Heather, I just thank you so much for hanging out with us here on the Fortified Life podcast. My goodness. Well, folks, that's all we have time for today. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you want to, we have our listeners who love audio version, so you can go on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We're easy to find. And then our YouTube audience, go to The Fortified Life on YouTube, and you can see Heather and I laughing and her getting
Yes.
excited, being the woo girl, as she said. Though I don't know how I'm going to continue that, but I will. And I'm going to remind people there was Heather Trumpfheller. Go watch that episode, and you'll find out the origin of the woo girl. But folks, remember to like, share, subscribe, leave a positive review if you've been impacted by the show. But you know how we leave things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. We'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.